Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in John chapter 10, and Jesus is making a comparison between hired shepherds. And hired shepherds do not care for the flock. Now, I really want to let that sink in because we have a lot of hired shepherds, hired pastors, hired leaders. If you wanted to capitalize on the church, there are very simple ways you could do it. One, if you have clout or money or both, you could go to any theological school. Any. You don't even have to be saved. You don't even have to be a Christian. Now, they may ask you, some of them, and you give the standard answer. Of course I'm saved. But they really don't have a mechanism where they're going to actually check, watch your fruit. They won't. They just will accept. And especially, again, if you have clout or money, if you come from a certain background, church background. Now, once you get a degree, theological degree, you then can pastor in any church with that degree. They're going to look at that theological degree. Now, to be clear, what that means is if you have a Baptist theological degree, you can pastor any Baptist church. If you have a Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, so forth and so on. Okay, so I'm not saying that if you have a Baptist theological degree that automatically you can go to a Presbyterian. But then, so once you get in there, that's the gateway into the church. Now, remember, we're going to get back to our text. Jesus said he was the door to the sheep. In today's society, the door to the sheep is through the theological infrastructure. So that's just say you get that degree. What you see in a lot of denominations, the struggle with a lot of denominations today is one, scandals, and even pastors who get so far and they leave the faith. In other words, all of a sudden they're atheists. All of a sudden, maybe they come out of the closet, and a whole myriad of stuff. So the question is, how did they get into those positions in the first place? Now, of course, if you get a good church, that's again a nice lifestyle. And if you are a hireling, that's how you think. Now, on the independent side, so you could say the non-denominational churches, they are independent of any denomination. They pose even a kind of a greater risk. So one, you could just start your church. You can start your own. And if you have the right church model, so like a seeker-friendly model, you're going to attract people because people are going to like your message. As long as you don't talk about sin, right? As long as you give messages of affirmation and affirming, okay? So so that's one way, and then those independent churches do not have kind of oversight. Denominational churches, at least at some point, like for example, the Catholic Church at some point had to deal with the pedophile priests. Same thing with denominations. At some point they had to deal with things. There was a hierarchy where they had to deal with it. Well, independent churches, sometimes you will have church boards, okay, but in general, the pastor is the head. So again, what would be a motivation to start an independent church? And a lot of times too, why do independent churches grow at very fast rates? Because people are tired of the traditional churches. They're tired of the liturgy, the traditions. Okay, so a lot of times these independent churches, they have dynamic praise and worship. They have dynamic messages, and the churches themselves, really cater to people. So, for example, they may, have a children church is a must. Your church could live and die if you don't have a children's ministry, right? So when the family comes to the church, the kids go one way and the parents go another, right? And there's all different kinds of the ministry. Now, in and of itself, I'm not saying those things are bad. Another thing that happens with independent churches is that the pastor, because now he's the gatekeeper, so he's the door into the shepherd, and he allows other false teachers. Now, I know this. I was in numerous churches where this happened, where the pastor would just invite. And when they invite, remember, they pay these ministers exuberant amounts of money. In some cases they pay. So when you look at the itinerant circuit, understand dollar signs, ching ching. When you see a church, famous minister is going to be at our Sunday service. I know that he's getting paid. Okay. And shame on those pastors because they don't care think about this. You think about the faith advisor to the president. And you think about when she gets paid. When she goes to churches, when you see her at churches, she gets paid. Worse than that, though, worse than a church paying her is look at the garbage she spills out. Look at the garbage she brings to the congregation. And we can multiply this over and over and over and over and over again with churches. All right, so Jesus is, oh, yes, here we go. I'm going to pick this up at verse 11. Now, I did say last time that in verse 10, he says the thief comes only to steal, kill, and to destroy. I have come so that you may have life and have it in abundance. And that verse of scripture has been so butchered because a lot of people use that to say that the thief is the devil. So basically how they apply that is to say that the devil is steal, kill, and destroy. So whether it's a job, whether it's whether it's a job, whether it's a sickness, health, whatever. When these things happen, they would say the devil is the thief; he's trying to steal. But on the other hand, Jesus comes that you may have life. Now, again, what I am saying is that that's not what that verse is saying. He says that, remember, in this text, the thief are the robbers who climbs in to the sheep in an illegal way. Okay? So false teachers, false pastors, false shepherds. Now, in verse 11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired man, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and run away when he sees the wolf coming The wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happened because he is a hired man and doesn't care for the sheep. So you can look at a lot of these pastors and just look at their lifestyle. And as I said before, there was a time where you had pastors. You still have them. They were just kind of more prominent, more out there. I want to say the 80s and the 90s, mostly what was called the prosperity teachers, that they would brag about their wealth. I mean, they would, yeah, I drive a Rolls Royce, a Bentley, Madoff, whatever. They would brag about and display their wealth. And what they would do is they would cause the people to rejoice. Like one particular man, I'll tell these two stories when I get back. There's two ministers. There was one, and I'm going to show you how they play with words. There was one particular minister who used to say, I'm believing God for a Rolls Royce. And when a pastor says that, understand this, the word manipulations. When a pastor sits up in his congregation, and if he says, oh man, I tell y'all, saints, I would love to have a homemade peach cobbler. Oh, I haven't had a peach cobbler in decades. And, I was just thinking about that. And it could be in passing, Do you know, and I say this, not seriously, but God will speak to someone in the congregation and they will make that pastor one of the most delicious homemade peach cobbler. And the next Sunday they would bring that. Pastor, the Lord told me to make this for you. Right? It just kind of goes with the position that, ministers, leaders in that position really have to be careful. Well, this pastor stood before his congregation and said, I'm believing God for a Rolls Royce. And do you know that the men's group got together and raised money like 100,000 plus to buy him his first Rolls Royce? And it was such an honor for them to do that. Now, I don't know if that men's group ever bought anyone who truly needs a car. For example, how much of a blessing if they bought a much, much lesser car, cheaper car, like, $10,000, right? So a tenth of the price, maybe, to someone in need, how that they could get to church, right? Have transportation to get to church, to get to a job. I wonder if they did that, because I can't say if they did or not. I wonder if they did that. There was another pastor, prosperity pastor, who got before his congregation and he said he was believing God for a $65 million jet. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. That everything about what he was saying, as far as the fact that he wanted a jet, the fact that he needed a jet, look, no problem. I think the one that he had, the private jet, because this was a period of time now where it was very fashionable. All the ministers had private jets. One minister not only had a jet, but he had a helicopter. Okay, that he would fly back and forth, between his campuses. All right. And again, watch this. I really don't care. They don't, I don't care. And the fact that it's other ministers that I'm talking about, ministers around the country, around the world, offices around the world. Hey, I have no problem with that. But here was the scam that he tried to pull. He first said, Lord, look, if so many people, and I forgot what the number was, I think it was 300,000 people. 300,000 people. If 300,000 people gave, I think it was, gave $1,000. Okay. Let me see if this come up with here. If I'm trying to think what the number was. If 300 was it 300,000 people? It was some kind of number he got, that if so many people gave, if 300,000 people gave so much money, it would amount to 65 million. Okay. I can't now think of what it is here. I know anyway, I'll try to figure it out. But that was the scam. And of course he got blowback from that. And then he got on his television. It was like, look, don't criticize me because I'm believing God for a $65 million. If I'm using my faith to believe God for a $65 million jet, don't you criticize me. The problem was that who was criticizing him? He was trying to pull a scam. See, he could have used his faith. He could have confessed, I speak a $65 million jet into being, and confessed it. And then when the plane materialized, he could have came to the congregation and said, look at my plane. I was believing God. Faith works. And here it is. No, he was trying to perpetrate a scam. And by the way, his ministry was going to buy the plane anyway. That's why I said, why go through that? Well, I understand why he was trying to do it. He didn't want that expense to be a burden to the church. But hireling. And a lot of times these pastors don't care. They don't care about the maturity of the church. They benefit. And sometimes they're like, by the way, that one pastor that I just mentioned, his life is in so much turmoil. He had a helicopter. He got the jet plane too, but he got the helicopter that he flies around, and they brag about their wealth. And so the only people who are getting wealthy in the congregations are those pastors. Now watch this. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired man, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away. And when he sees the wolf coming, the wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happened because he is a hired man and doesn't care about the sheep. You see, the idea is that right here, they don't care about the sheep. They care about fattening themselves. That's why I say when you look at these ministers, the only ones who are getting wealthy by their prosperity teaching is them. And that's really the only thing that kind of works for them, not the teaching itself. The point is, they're the one that's getting wealthy. Pretty much all of the famous prosperity teachers are millionaires plus. And the reason why is because their whole ministry is built upon you giving your money. Same thing with, I told you about the seeker-friendly movement that started in the 80s and had hundreds of thousands of churches affiliated with them. And basically, it was a ministry built upon a lie. And after 30 plus years, the founder of the seeker-friendly movement said, after reflection, the seeker-friendly message is a failure. And really, after 30 years, hired guns. So Jesus gives a comparison. A good shepherd lays his life down for for the sheep. He gives his life for the sheep. That's the difference. A hireling only benefits from the people. You think about these healers, these fake healers. They're hirelings because they manipulate people with fake healings, right? When they wave their jackets and people pretend to fall, they're hirelings. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are